Today I'm going to give some examples of calculating and using the declinations in respect to a particular location that a person might be visiting or living in. So the first thing we need to do is find out all the declinations for the planets. And to do that, we can go to Kala, open your chart, and go to one of the main screens. On the upper right-hand side, you'll see a table with all kinds of various planetary information. That's where you're going to find the declination. So you just scroll through here until you find the declination column. What I like to do is just drag that column to the beginning here. If you're going to be using this technique, have it in the beginning where you can access it and see it easier. It's not something that's used very often, so it's sort of in the end. But if you're going to use it, you can put it right here. Now the logna is not going to have a declination, so you never do this technique for the logna. Okay, logna is the same everywhere. So here we have all of our declinations. The sun is 329.34. Moon is minus 28.20.09. That means the moon has south declination. It's south of the equator. The minus is south of the equator. Mars at 1707, and etc. Now remember, for this technique, you don't need to bother whether it's south, which is minus, or positive, which is north. All you need is the number. Okay? Now I've written all those numbers down here. Sun 329, Moon 28.20.09, Mars 1707.16, and so on for all the planets. As I mentioned, because it is difficult to work with degrees, minutes, and seconds with calculations, it's easiest just to convert that to the decimal equivalent, degrees and decimals. So again, to do that, so you can actually see it, the sun is 3 degrees, 29 minutes, and 34 seconds. So we have to turn 29 minutes, 34 seconds into this decimal of 0.49. So how do we do that? We start by taking 34, which is the seconds, dividing it by 60. That gives us 0.566. And that is the decimals of minutes that the seconds equal, okay? The fractions of minutes, basically. To that, we're going to add the minutes, which is 29, plus 29. So 29.34, 29 minutes, 34 seconds equals 29.566 minutes. Then we're going to divide that by 60 to get the decimal of degrees. And the reason we divided by 60 is because there's 60 minutes in a degree. And that gives us 0.492. Therefore, we have 3 degrees, 0.49 is what 329.34 comes out to, 3.49 degrees. So we need to go and do that, and you only have to do this once on your chart or whatever chart you're working for all the planets. So as another example, Mars is at 1707.16. 16, take the seconds, divided by 60, equals 0.266. Add the minutes, which is 7 minutes here. Plus 7 equals 7.26, divided by 60 to get the fraction of degrees. It's 0.1211. So 17 degrees, 0.12 is the decimal equivalent of 1707.16. So we need to go through that for all of the planets, okay? To get that decimal first to start with. The next thing we need to do, I've done it for a couple cities here. I've already done it for Fort Collins. I've already done it for Prescott. We're going to do it, for example, we're going to do it for Yakima. So first thing we need to do is find the city and the latitude of the city. So you can just go to New Birth Chart, go to the atlas, type in Yakima, Washington, and we'll get a latitude of 46 north 3608. Again, doesn't matter whether it's north or south. So that comes to 463608. So that's the number we're going to use here, 463608. The first thing we want to do is convert that to a decimal equivalent, okay, of 46 degrees and some decimal. So we take the 8 seconds divided by 60. Then to that we add the minutes, which is 36. Divide that by 60. to get the fraction. So Yakima is at 46, where was that number? 46.60. Okay, so I'll put 46.60 as the decimal equivalent of Yakima. Now that we've got the declinations and decimals as well as the location in decimals, we can go on to figure out how close the declinations are when we start stacking them up. So 3.49 is declination of the sun. Yakima is at 46.6. And so we need to see how many times 3.49 will go into 46.6. And we just want to take like an educated guess. Let's take 3.49 times 12. What do we get? We get 41.8. That's still more than 3.49 away. So we're going to add 3.49. We get 45.37. Now we're really close. How far is 45.37 from 46.6? Well, it looks like 1.23. An easy way we can do that with the calculator, from 45.37, we can just divide 46.6, and we get 1.23. Don't worry about if it comes out negative or positive. So the sun is 1.23 degrees from being exact at that location of Yakima. So we do that for all the planets. The moon at 2820, we have to find the closest multiple of the moon. 2 times the moon is going to be 56, 40 approximately. And 1 times the moon is going to be 2833. Now 2833 is about 18 degrees from the Yakima 4660. So it's going to be better if we go 28.33 times 2 and get 56.66. Subtract the latitude of Yakima, 46.6 from that, and we get 10.06. So the moon is a long ways away from anything here. Mars is at 1712. If we go 2 times Mars is declination, 17 times 17 will give us about 34. We're going to be about 12 away. That's a lot. Yet. If we go 3 times 1712, that'll probably work better. 17.12 times 3 equals 51.36 minus the latitude of Yakima, 46.6, gives us 4.76. Okay. Going on to Mercury at 5.72. Well, Mercury will probably go in there 9 times about. Let's try 9. 5.72 times 9 equals 51.48. Actually, we're pretty far away. We're about 5 away. So let's subtract 5.72, which is Mercury's declination, and we get 45.76. Now we're real close. Subtract that by 46.6, and we get 0.84. So Mercury is 0.84 away from exact at the location of Yakima. Jupiter at 1140 will be about 4 times. So 11.4 times 4 equals 45.6. So Jupiter's 1 degree away. Venus at 8.78 will be about, let's see, 8.78. Let's go 5 times 5 brings us to 43.9. That's pretty close. Minus 46.6 equals 2.7. So Venus is 2.7 away there. Saturn at 12.8 degrees is probably around 4 times 12.08 times 4 equals 48.32 minus 46.6 equals 1.72 degrees away from exact at that location of Yakima. Rahu and Ketu are always the same. They're at 7.25. So we go about 6 times. Let's see what we get. We'll get 43.5. So that means 3.1 degrees away from exact. Okay. On those. Uranus at 1.96, well, 1.96 times, say, let's do 23 and see what we get. Comes out to 45.8, but I think if we add another 1.96 to it, which is Uranus's declination, we get 47.04. That's closer. Minus 46.6 gives us 0.44. So Uranus is quite close, as it always will be because it's only has a declination of 1.96 degrees. Neptune at 18.62, 18.62 times 3 equals 55.86. Well, if we subtract that from 46.6, we get 9.26. So that's as close as Yakima is going to be to Neptune. It's a long ways from there. Pluto at 7.43. That would be about 6 times. Comes to 44.58, so that's close. Minus 46.6 equals minus 2.2, or 2.2 is all we need to know. 2.02. So now we've worked out all the how far each planet is from being exact on that. And the planet that's closest is going to be the sort of most strongest influence. Okay? And of course, if I don't think I mentioned it, but this is my chart. I thought we'd just continue with the theme of the first class. It's always good to check the location of the place that you were born as a foundation. It's always kind of fun to see that. I remember in my chart, even before I calculated out this for my birth location, I just thought to myself, Mercury has to be the planet that was closest in declination at my birthplace. And I calculated out, and I really wasn't surprised to see that Mercury was at 0.55. It was the closest planet, therefore a very active planet in my birthplace of Fort Collins, which I lived until I was 8 years old. Now, the interesting about that, and the reason I figured it had to be Mercury, because that's when I did the most mercurial things. During that time, I spent most of my time learning crafts, whether from my mother or my older friends. Most of my friends were about 5 years older than me at the time, and they were constantly making cool things, and I was watching and taking part. So I learned a lot of things even at the age of 5 or 6. I was making things that 10 or 12-year-old kids were doing. So very craft-centered and friend-centered period of my life. And of course, Mercury rules both those things. Mercury also happens to be the weakest planet in Shadbala in my chart. So as far as, I didn't make a particularly great impression on my teachers. I didn't make a particularly great impression with my peers. I didn't have I wasn't considered a powerful and important person. I just kind of learned a lot of crafts and did a lot of things with friends. But, there was nothing during that time to make anyone think I was any different than very average, okay? Because Mercury is weak in Shadbala, so I wasn't doing anything really unique as a 6-year-old. Sure, I was sort of doing more crafts. It was really craft-centered time, but I didn't really, at that time, come up with anything unique. I wasn't like doing amazing paintings or drawings or anything like that my parents were saying, oh gosh, you're so talented. It was nothing like that. I just had a lot of Mercury, which is friends and crafts in my life, basically. And I was doing some crafts, that were other kids my age weren't doing, but I wasn't like I was doing them particularly well. I was just doing them because all the neighbor kids in my neighborhood were 4 or 5 years older than me, so I hung out with them. And that's because Mercury was weak in Shadbala. Okay. Okay. So it's kind of fun just to see that strongest thing during that time. Okay. And of course, my Mercury is also combust. So at that time, it was a very, definitely difficult time for me to communicate. Very shy kid at that time. fact, my sister used to do most of my talking for me, because my Mercury just didn't want to talk. So we'd go to a store or something, and the guy would ask what we wanted, and I would whisper it to my sister, and then she would tell the storekeeper what I wanted. That's how my Mercury just didn't want to talk to save its life. Because it was, not only weak in Shadbala, but combust. And those were like the dominant themes of my life. A kid who didn't talk, who went to speech therapy, who did lots of crafts, and had a lot of friends at the time. Okay? That, more than any other period of my life, I had more friends that I hung out with on a constant basis during my early life there in Fort Collins. So it was easy for me to see it. I had to have a dominant Mercury influence even before I even calculated out my declinations. Okay. A few years ago, I lived in Yakima from 2006 till about 2010. I lived there for 4 years, about June 2006 to end of August 2010. Okay, it's 4 years and 4 months there. And here we see the dominant influence is Uranus. And that's not a surprise, because so often wherever I live, the dominant influence is going to be Uranus. Okay? And that is because Uranus is just the closest planet, has the lowest declination of just 1.96 degrees. Any planet that has a really low declination, almost anywhere you go will be pretty powerful. Whereas planets like my moon or Mars that have a high declination degree, only in a few places are those planets going to get really emphasized. But when they do, they're going to be super emphasized, as I mentioned. Okay? So here in Yakima, we can see Uranus was my most emphasized planet. And Uranus in Vedic astrology, or in Western astrology, of course, Vedic astrologers don't traditionally use them. Uranus is all about, being an individual, doing your own thing regardless of the consequences. And that definitely marked a period of my life during that time. That was when I started using the tropical zodiac, and I told everyone I was using the tropical zodiac, which was a real Uranus move. Uranus move from the point of view of traditional Vedic astrology of using the sidereal zodiac, which of course I think wasn't even used until about 500 AD when the Hindus lost the knowledge of precession. I think they always used tropical. But that was sort of a revolutionary concept, and brought a lot of flack from some people, but a lot of other people thought the sidereal zodiac never made sense to them, and though they started studying Vedic astrology because they did like you doing it with Vedic. So that was a very Uranus time of definitely doing my own thing regardless of the consequences. During that time. And that was an area dominated with the closest planet being Uranus. And Uranus is always going to be pretty close, but in Yakima, that was the strongest place. I also had a nice house at the time. I had a big yard. I did a lot of things in my yard in ways that my neighbors were just sort of shaking their heads and making jokes about me, but they were all friendly, nice jokes. And, a lot of it was the way I did my yard work. I did everything manually. I had to clear out a lot of trees. I literally cleared out about 50 trees. Some of them were 30, 40 feet monsters. I did all with a handsaw. And I got a nickname for that called chainsaw, because I wasn't using a chainsaw. It was kind of a, sarcastic nickname, calling me chainsaw, because I did everything with a handsaw. Took out all these trees, chopped them up. With the handsaw, and they were like, why don't you use your chainsaw? And I said, I had a chainsaw, but I was just being eccentric and using my handsaw because I liked to exercise. But of course, no one in my neighborhood could figure that, understand that, And that was just the beginning of all the crazy things I did in my yard at that place. So, definitely Uranus was strong in my career and my personal life at that time. The next closest planet we can see is Mercury. Mercury's a strong planet as well. Second strongest. Well, at that period place, I also started painting again, which I hadn't painted since I was a little kid. And I started painting in the, winter of 2006, 2007, shortly after I moved there. And, so crafts became a much more important thing that I was spending time doing, where at the end of the day, I'd be just, left brain would be cooked. And from too much thinking on astrology, and I was doing some really intense stock research for a client. And you know, it really helped me to start doing crafts and doing painting, basically doing more, you know, using the other half of the brain, using the artistic half of the brain. And you know, Mercury is the planet also of balance. You know, Mercury's a neuter. He's not male, he's not female. So he always is about um, creating balance. And you know, crafts and art are really, which Mercury gives skill for, very balanced activity. A lot of thought needs to go into them, but then you also have to use your creative mind. So those things ruled by Mercury really use both parts of our brain. Ideally, in the more equal way, the more effective. So during that time, definitely more mercurial things came into my life at the time. Okay. So those were the two dominant influences. Okay. So it's always fun to sort of see the most dominant influences. Okay. So after just, I don't want to spend too much time on Yakima. One thing we could say is that Mars was, interesting enough, pretty far away, 4.76. A lot of the reasons I went there was for Mars reasons, with the hope of Mars reasons. Unfortunately, none of the Mars reasons worked out for us. Okay, we ended up not being very happy with, and as a reason we left. Like one of the main reasons we went there, we thought it'd be a nice place to live, and we liked the houses and the real estate. So we bought a house up there, which is Mars. But it wasn't shortly after we moved in that we really felt like we made a big mistake and we weren't really happy there. And it didn't take us long to figure out we really did want to move, okay, eventually. You'll also see, relevant to a lot of planets, that Saturn's pretty close. Jupiter's closer. Jupiter's wealth, you know, wealth came readily enough. But see, Saturn's pretty close, and we were struggling financially. We always made it. Fortunately, Saturn's not too close, so it wasn't too great of a burden. But in my chart, Saturn's with Mars, and so Mars is trashing Saturn and starving Saturn. And Mars is real estate, starving Saturn. I was also in Mars period during that time. So financially, it was really hard to keep up on the house. Luckily, Jupiter, which is wealth, was there, and I came up with lots of innovative ways to make enough money to pay my mortgage, which was really insanely high. So it worked out okay, but it was definitely stressful because Saturn was closer than ideal, you know, than you'd want to be with a troubled Saturn. If my Saturn was really nice, it would be nice to live next to Saturn. Because it's joined with Mars, living too close to Saturn when there's not a lot of intervening planets, when it's, you know, in the dominant half of the planets, will be painful. You know, if we break it down into the dominant half and the less dominant half, where we got Pluto, Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, Moon, and Mars are the least, and Venus are the least effective planets. And the other planets, including Saturn, are the stronger planets. So Saturn's in that wrong half. And so definitely Saturn was a big issue during that time. Okay, but anyway, then I moved to Prescott, Arizona in August of 2006 on a spur of the moment impulse. And you'll see Prescott's really amazing in the sense that almost all my planets are really, really close to exact. And that's really uncommon. You'll compare this to other places I've lived, and you'll see that there's big gaps. You know, some planets are really close and some are really far away. In Prescott, the only planet that's far away is the moon. So there's just so many planets close. When you see that, it's in general going to be a good place for a person. And the reason is because a good place is sort of defined as a place where a person can be balanced and sort of do everything in their lives. Okay? If a place is really dominant for one planet, then you're going to do a lot of that planet there, but there's no room for doing any of the other planets. And it's just a matter of time before you go into a period where a dominant planet becomes very less dominant or insignificant. And if you live out a place where there's a only one planet that's really strongly indicated, that place won't feel right anymore because you won't feel like you have the outlets to do the other things that you need to do as the dashas and things in your chart change. However, if you're living at a place where, um, if you're living in a place where um, all the planets or a lot of the planets are really close, in their declinations, you got really strong influences. And that means the place is going to just give you so many opportunities for any outlet of any planet you want. So as different planets rise and give their effects in your chart, you'll always be able to find an outlet for that planet in that place. Okay? So in Prescott, I've got this really close planets everywhere except for the moon. Okay, all the other planets are close. The best thing is all the malefic planets, pretty much most of them, the ones that can make for more stress, Saturn, Rahu, Ketu, Neptune, and Pluto. For the planets that, when they're a dominant influence, can make life more stressful than you want it to be over a long period of time, they're far away. Comparatively, they're close, but compared to the other planets, they're far away. Instead, we get some of the enjoyable planets, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Uranus, I wouldn't call enjoyable, but Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter, all nice. Sun, pretty good too. So, there's been way less stress since I lived here. Financially, things have been better than my entire life. It's the one time in my life I haven't been concerned with debts, and as long as I can remember, I haven't had to worry about debts. I can comfortably pay my mortgage. I can comfortably pay my bills, which is kind of nice. And then there's lots of strong influences. I've got a strong Mars, just 0.3 away on Mars. It's really, really close, the closest of any place I've lived for Mars. We found a property, a house that we like. We love spending time developing it, working on the yard. Right now I'm building a huge garden space with raised bed gardens that's all enclosed, because out here there's a lot of wildlife that pretty much eats anything that you try to plant. So you have to have an enclosed garden space, and it's a huge enclosed garden space. I mean, it's as big as a 4-car garage. It's just a big structure I'm building right now. All that's Mars, and so we're doing that. Mercury is very active. There's been good business partnerships developed, which is Mercury 2. I've been able to have enough time to continue painting and working on the crafts. Jupiter solid, which is good for writing and finances, of course. Venus is solid, so interesting enough, Venus is solid. You'll see I haven't lived in a Venus place in many years. That was close. And as a result, I really haven't cared about like vehicles, like cars. I actually bought a car for myself in Venus period. Just an old car that I liked, so I could have something to get around in when I needed it. And whereas before I didn't even care if I owned a car, so Venus got more active. Saturn is not very active, which is good for dealing with debts and problems. Rahu and Ketu is not as active, which makes for less unexpected, confusing periods of life. So it's just a really excellent place. It'd be hard for me to get a place that has more planets strongly indicated, and which doesn't have more of the tough planets strongly indicated. Because over the long haul, usually you're going to just feel more comfortable if you can live in places where your comfortable planets and the sun, meaning the gentle planets, Jupiter, Mercury, Venus, and the sun, are lined up in a way that they're the most active. If you're not in a career period of your life, say you're retired or something, then you probably don't really care and want your sun to maybe be really strongly activated, because that can be, you might just want to get away from more career stuff. But but if it is, it just so if you're missing the sun, you want to retire, that's fine. But otherwise, it's nice to have the sun strongly indicated in general, especially if you have a good sun. So and it's really interesting, just as these numbers indicate, all in all, I feel the most balanced here of any other place I've lived. You know, I like the opportunities. I take advantage of opportunities. I do more various things. I'm living in a much more balanced way than I ever have, as shown by these so many planets being close, not as extreme as some of these other places. And so with these numbers, I know as the dashas change, as I go from the tail end of Mars now into Rahu, and from Rahu into Jupiter eventually, that the dashas are going to, the planets, there'll always be opportunities for those dasha planets to find realization here. The only planet that wouldn't really is the moon. Okay. Interesting enough, during this time of the moon, I've gotten a lot less attached to moon things such as my mother. It's just our relationship changed a little bit during that time where, we used to work harder to see each other, and now we live closer and we don't work as hard. So the fact that we sort of live closer makes it less important to see each other. It's kind of a weird dynamic, and I wouldn't expect it to work that way. When we see each other, we have fun, but now that we're closer, we don't make as much stress to get closer to see each other as we did when we lived further away. And that's, because the moon here is just not as emphasized because of my living here. So the moon is not the most active. So if I went into moon dasha or something, I wouldn't really be happy here. I'd feel like there would be opportunities I was missing. But the thing is, moon dasha ended about 8 years ago, 7 years ago, no, 8 years ago. And so moon dasha won't come again. So that really isn't that important. So anyway, so now you know how to do the math, which is one of the main thing I wanted to show you in this class, and just give a few brief examples of what to look for. You want all your favorite planets to line up with the location, and then you're probably going to feel more comfortable there and stay there longer. So this is an indication of me staying here quite a long time for this area that I live currently, because all the planets are so close. And, also so many of the nice planets are close that, I get to enjoy nice things without as much difficulty as I might, and more regularly than I would living in other places. Okay. Then if you've got cruel planets, Saturn, Rahu, Ketu, waning moon, sun, any of those planets, especially if they're afflicted in bad Logitati Avashtas, then if those are the further away planets, it's going to help you escape a lot of stress. Okay. All right, so I hope that everyone understands the math now, that you can calculate this for yourself. I'm hoping, right now we're finishing up the 2013 version of Kala. Next year for the 2014, I basically want to do a relocation module that will do all the techniques that I'll be covering in this course. It'll cover this plus some other techniques, as well as the Kakinis, and just calculate all that for a person. So we'll see how that goes. But for now, you just do it by hand, and it's not that difficult. It's just a lot of simple, basic calculations. But it doesn't take long. When a little practice, in 5 minutes, you'll be able to whip out a city and then have an idea of that city. Okay? Now, this is by no means a complete analysis. This is just one principle of analysis. After this one, you might want to consider other ones. What's nice about this technique is that once you find out what latitude you want, because you can just work out, what I used to do with this, I used to just work out every planet for every latitude. And I'd say, well, the sun at 3.49, at 6.98, at, and so on. Just keep adding 3.49 over and over again until I had every latitude for the sun on the globe. Not every latitude. I might go up to about 45 or 50, which went up about as high or low as I could ever imagine living. And you do that for all the cities, then you can get a little map of where each planet's going to line up. And then you can really quickly get a broad overview of the globe and say, oh, at 40 degrees north, anywhere at 40 degrees north, these are the planets that are going to be strongly indicated, and these are the ones I'm going to be far away from. And then you can real quickly get an idea of what places to visit and what cities to live in, depending on what you want to experience while you're there. And then you would use that in conjunction with some other techniques to fine-tune what's going on. But this is a nice technique because it can really help you get the latitudes. So I know that any city I live in at around a 34 to 35 degree latitude is going to be, in many respects, really nice for me. Okay. Now there'll be some other variances based on longitudes as well, which we'll cover shortly in another class. But it lets me know all the latitudes I can be interested in pursuing, and that can narrow down the list of cities you might consider living in. Okay, so it's a great technique for just a specific city. It's also a great technique for just a very broad area of what latitudes will do what